Welcome back to Reliable Sources. I'm Jeffrey Toobin. Quote, rarely has a U.S. president been so wrong about so much at the expense of so many, unquote. That's from former Vice President Dick Cheney talking about President Obama and Iraq. And some people are saying pot, kettle. It's an understatement to say that Dick Cheney is still a polarizing figure. And the questions remain. Is Cheney a reliable source on Iraq? Should you listen to what he says? And there's this question. Does he damage national security by saying it? Joining me now to discuss that is, in New York, CNN military analyst and retired Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona, and here in D.C., counterterrorism analyst Philip Mudd. Okay, Dick Cheney's given a lot of interviews lately. One of them was with Charlie Rose, and here's an exchange that they had.
You've heard this as every interview you've done, you know. They're saying, here comes with the guy who's responsible for a lot of the bad things went wrong in Iraq, now wants to come in and point the finger to the Obama administration for the situation we have in Iraq today. And they often even say, how dare he step forward to do that?
I don't hesitate to defend what we did. With respect to whether or not we did the right thing going into Iraq, I believe it. I know we can argue about it. Different people have different views. The reason I'm concerned now is because there was a relatively simple proposition in front of the administration. The president, as late as 2011, was talking about what good shape Iraq was in terms of being stable.
Philip, so is listening to Dick Cheney like listening to an arsonist on fire prevention? I mean, should we listen to what he's saying?
Look, I faced the vice president when I was at CIA. He's a challenging guy to talk to. The former vice president is seen as someone who always is claiming the sky is falling. That said, as I said, when I talked to him in government, and he was very tough for me to deal with in the vice president's office, he visited out at CIA headquarters when I was there. We had exchanges. Very thoughtful guy, very smart. So I'm not saying I'm a Republican. I'm not saying a Democrat. I'm just saying let's be careful about just ignoring the message because we don't like the messenger.
But Rick, I think a lot of people, when they hear Dick Cheney talking about Iraq, they hear him saying that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that the invasion was going to go a certain way, which it certainly did not. Isn't there a problem, independent of the merits now, that his record in the past is frankly so bad that people won't listen or shouldn't listen to what he says now?
Yeah, and it calls to his credibility. I mean, here's the guy that most people pin a lot of the problems we had in Iraq. I mean, many of us supported the invasion of Iraq. We were just appalled by the way it was conducted, all the mistakes that were made, disbanding the Iraqi army and all of that. He had to have a role in that. So you can question his credibility. But if you look what he's saying today, going back to, say, 2008 to 2011 and then 2011 to where we are now, I think he makes some valid points, and I think they need to be listened to. Now, you can question his credibility, but he still has some valid points.
What about the argument that, look, you know, these people were involved in making the policy. They are taking responsibility. Cheney is stepping up and saying, yes, I was involved, and we can learn, for better or worse, from their experience, and the only way we can challenge them is if they speak out. Shouldn't we be grateful that Cheney is making himself the target that he is?
Well, as I've said, he brings up some very important points. We need to have a discussion about what happened in 2011, the failure of the United States to secure an extension to the Status of Forces Agreement. I think that plays a big role in where we are right now. Now, you can argue about whose fault it was it an Iraqi decision, American decision, but the fact is that is the critical decision that has gotten us to where we are today, and we need to talk about it.
Philip, where do you stand on Cheney's approach versus George W. Bush's approach on commenting on the actions of their successors?
Well, when I watch this play out, I think there's a difference between tone and substance. People who leave the White House as president or vice president, I think, have a responsibility to be statesmen in America and to bring the country together. You can comment on national policy with a tone that's meant to reflect decades of service. I find sometimes that the president comes in with, the former president comes in with that tone. I find sometimes...
Which former president?
Former President Bush does. I find sometimes former President Cheney is maybe more willing to engage in a debate that gets to be partisan. And whether you're Democrat or Republican, I think when you hold one of those top positions, you almost discard party.
Rick, isn't it true that even if you, the policy executors, the people who are actually implementing the policy, are not distracted by the press. Your bosses, the politicians, are deeply involved in paying attention to what the press is doing. How does that affect what you do?
Actually, if you've got a good boss, they will take all of the heat and they will let you do the operations. I've worked for some great people who said, okay, here's how this is going to work. I'm going to handle everything from here up, and you're going to handle everything on the ground. You run the operation, I'll take the flack. That's what you want, somebody like that who can take, like Phil says, answer all the inquiries from the executive branch, from the Congress, and then prepare whatever testimony and all that. But let you run the operation. I think it works very well that way.
That's the theory. Does it work that way in practice?
That point is critical. We're not here for a leadership forum, but let me tell you something. I saw a lot of heat. And there are two kinds of people in circumstances like that, those who reflect it down to the workplace and those who absorb it. I swear I saw that every day. If you reflect it, the workforce is going to tense up and respond. If you absorb it, the workforce will maintain focus.
Well, one thing I think we know for sure is that Dick Cheney is going to continue bringing the heat, for better or worse. And I'd like to thank Rick Francona in New York and Philip Mudd here in Washington.
Thank you.